Well, happy St. Patrick's Day, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Gee Whiz Weekends. I'm Emerald Fox.
I'm Lynette Zang.
And each week we're going to be pulling a social media post regarding the current economy and any questions that I might have that I'd like Lynette to answer for us and give us a little bit more information about what we might be able to do about the situation. So without further ado, we'll dive right in.
Ready.
This first post is from Market Watch,
Okay.
and it says, one thing that Republicans and Democrats agree on about the economy, the cost of raising kids. So with that said, my second post is from CNBC, and it says, consumer prices rose 0.3% in January, more than expected, as the annual rate moved to 3.1%. Now, as we jump into this, I am a married millennial and I'm approaching the days of starting a family. So this is very concerning to me. I mean, how am I going to afford saving for retirement, paying for groceries, paying for schooling, all of these things when we are continuing to see these, increases go up and up and up? And you've been talking about these hyperinflationary periods and, the devaluation of the dollar. What can we do to, offset these costs and make sure that we're, taking control of our lives, especially with children?
That's a really great question. And some of it depends on timing, right? So there's the short term, which we need to use the fiat money for our tool of barter, because that, at least at this point, I don't think this is always going to be true, but at this point, that's what you still accept, right, for payment and use as payment.
Right.
But then there are the longer terms, so putting a child through college, things like that. We do know, we can determine roughly, I'm not ever going to get you to the penny, but we can determine how much that fundamental value of gold is. We can determine what the fundamental value of the dollar is too. And the reason what you're really talking about is the dollar moving towards its fundamental or true value, which is zero. There are over 4,800 currencies and growing. That list is growing pretty rapidly right now. So the way that you can do it on a shorter term basis is to take part of the money that you earn and put it into physical gold and physical silver. You can also grow your community around you so that you can take care of food, water, energy, security, barterability, wealth preservation, community, and shelter. Because part of those costs are food costs, right?
Exactly.
And that really is what grows almost, other than energy, like those are two very rapidly growing costs, and that's going to get worse. So you want to look at what you're spending money on right now. And I know that, it's also part of it is the training. It's kind of been interesting for me. My daughters are a little bit about 10 years older, so they're in a different generation. Than you are. And then, of course, I'm in a much different generation. And every generation has their own kinds of, obstacles, and it's further and further away from sound money. Like I was there in 71 when we transitioned from a debt-based money into sound money. I remember when my girls first came home talking about labels on their clothes, which was never an issue when I was growing up. Now, I think in your generation, you're very used to swiping everything, using your phone for everything, giving up your privacy for everything, right?
Everything.
So, when you're looking at, you're starting to, you've formed a family, you're recently married, right? So you've formed a family and you've done what for some they are not able to do either. You bought a home, right? And you're starting to establish it. But I'm thinking you also have a mortgage on that home.
That's right.
Right?
I do.
So what you really need to do is put your goals first. This really goes into the strategy and how it looks at things on a short-term basis as well as a longer-term basis. And what you want to do is protect your purchasing power, because I believe that we have already begun that hyperinflationary move, even though it's not apparent to the general public yet. Okay. And we have also just recently seen an official breakout on the spot market of gold anyway, not
rising.
silver so much, but gold for sure. So you need to accumulate enough to convert into the gold to hold your purchasing power, which will, and execute the strategy.
Right.
So you want to take a look at all your fixed rate debts. You want to minimize or eliminate those variable rate debts.
So like
because
credit card debt. Okay.
Exactly, because credit card debt is what's going to kill you when it's obvious to everybody else that we're in hyperinflation. Those interest rates move up so rapidly that no matter how much you're paying, you're not touching the principal.
Right.
Okay, so it is a bit of planning, and then it might mean not drinking as many Starbucks coffees. And I don't know that you do that. I'm just saying that this is okay. This is buying coffee out is a very millennial kind of thing to
The
do,
concept.
right? But take a look at your expenses and what are you spending money on?
Going out to eat and eating, drinking out with friends, traveling, all of that stuff. So, yeah.
Right. And I think that's where you start. You start and you look at, what am I spending money on? So even if you kept a diary for, say, 1 or 2 weeks, right, and really wrote everything down, because the easier it is to pay for something,
It's just gone in seconds. You don't even realize it.
Exactly. I mean, if you had gold in your pocket or silver in your pocket, that weighs. And if you pull it out and you have to pay for everything, you're a whole lot more aware. If all you're doing is swiping your phone, right, you just aren't as aware. So, number one, I would say keep a diary for a week or two, as long as you're willing to do it, but at least to get an overview. Don't change your spending habits.
Okay.
Do exactly what you've been doing. Then you can look at how you've been spending your money, and you can start to make some changes there. And say, do I really need to go to Starbucks every day? Maybe that's going to be a once a week treat, and that extra money I can put over here and accumulate for silver or for gold.
Okay.
Right? Does that make sense? How often do you go out to eat, right? Maybe you can, and I think that that's what you have to do first. You have to see where you're at and what you're really doing realistically. Because a lot of times, it's just like counting calories too. A lot of times, just because you're writing it down, all of a sudden you make a change. But I think the first part is you got to be honest with yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? So keep a diary, write it down. Don't change a thing, but then sit there, look at it in real time and say, okay, where am I being unnecessarily frivolous?
Yeah.
Right? So I'm not talking about austerity, but there are places to cut and then accumulate and position into physical gold and silver so that you can hold your purchasing power. Then when you have a baby, then we've got to talk about education.
Right.
But that's all part of the strategy. And we'll look at what the education costs are. We can determine how much that is in terms of gold and silver and their fundamental value. So we can plan for that future event.
Okay.
Right? Maybe you want to buy a second home. Maybe you want to retire. Maybe you want to do all of these things. But first you got to look at where you're at. And how can I just tweak it so I can still have a nice standard of living, but I can also protect myself. And that's what I would say.
Right. Awesome. That's wonderful. I did have one other question for you. Now we're talking about our purchasing power.
Yes.
When we're going back to the interest rates and the percentage of the consumer price index, now how can we trust that when the big factors like food and energy aren't even included in that, even with the volatility? But that's so important day to day for each and every one of us. Those are, like you just talked about, things that we're eating, groceries or growing your own food, things like that. I mean, we just can't trust those numbers at all.
That would be true, but it's also called hedonics. It isn't just that they remove, and they do, they remove things, but since, I mean, a lot of it is Social Security and social programs that are tied to the level of inflation. So they don't want inflation to run too hot because then they have to increase those entitlement programs. You have to understand this. So for a long time, you're right. How can you trust these now? You can't. Trust your personal experience. Maybe even when you're tracking that, I mean, save a grocery bill. And then don't look at it for a year and go back and look at that grocery bill and trust your gut. Trust your personal experience. Pay attention just a teeny bit differently, which is actually what I'm asking you to do when you're looking at, at writing things down.
Right.
Because I personally found that when I look at things just a teeny weeny bit differently, I don't even have to look at them that much. It's amazing what you see. It like opens up a whole new world. No, you can't trust the government numbers. The government numbers are designed to create nominal confusion, right? Because you're going, well, wow, they only said it's up 3.1%. And I mean, you know, and then what do you hear? Oh, inflation is coming down. They're not talking about the prices coming down. They're talking about the speed of increases in certain areas coming down. No, you can't go by that. You can't trust that.
Okay.
You can't trust that at all.
Okay, good. All right. Well, that's great information. And as promised, I want to jump into a question from one of our viewers.
And are we going to do more on the podcast as well?
That's right.
So make sure you see that.
As always, we're going to be taking your questions and turning those into a podcast where I'm going to be going through those questions with Lynette, and she'll be able to touch on those, give her opinion, and any information that she has. But first, today we have one from our viewer, Liza C. She says, we have a vested life insurance policy with the opportunity to remove the cash equity with no penalty and maintain the term style face value of the policy for another 10 years. We can either roll in the cash equity or remove it. We are thinking about putting the cash equity portion into precious metals so it won't be lost if a paper market were to crash and go away. What say you?
Well, number one, I think that's a very good idea, right? And the only thing you have to be careful of is if you do remove it at some point, as long as your contract, your insurance contract, is in effect, it will not create a taxable event. But you just need to be aware of that so that you can make the educated choices.
Right, and they can check in with their policy holder to find that information out?
Oh, absolutely. And she kind of indicated that in that it would still be enforced for 10 years. Okay, because there'll be a certain amount of cash that generates. It sounds like it's a whole life policy or something like that is what it sounds like.
Yeah.
Which is pretty expensive insurance. And what people also need to understand, and I'm going to be doing a piece on insurance next week, actually.
Oh, great. Stay tuned for that, Liza.
And the dangers, right, the dangers of that. The thing that they need to understand is that any policy is only as good as the counterparty to that policy. And there are a lot of things that are happening in the insurance industry. So do I think that it's a good idea to take the cash value and put it into gold and silver? 100% yes, though you have to do whatever you're comfortable doing. I think that's important. But yes, that would be a great use of that extra cash value in there.
Awesome.
And you know, you have it already and it's in position. I would not encourage any new contracts in whole life or in that realm. It's not a great way to accumulate wealth. You know, it's and I know the whole life policies, you know, it kind of looks like a savings, but you know, be careful of what things look like versus what they really are. If it's about insurance, it's like I don't have it anymore because I aged out, right? But instead of a whole life policy, I had a term policy because I wanted to make sure that if I still had a mortgage on the house or if I had something that when I passed away, that would take care of any bills so it wasn't passed on to my children.
Right.
Again, it goes back to what you're trying to accomplish, and it's always the right tool for the job.
Yeah.
Okay, but yeah, I mean, I would take the cash value as quickly as possible, but you need to be conscious. Does this mean that in 10 years you're going to have a taxable event on that?
Right.
Right? Which doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it necessarily. It just means that you need to be aware of it.
Yeah, and make sure that you can afford that depending on what you're, putting the funds into.
Right. Or maybe if you took a teeny bit less, and I don't know the answer to this, you've got to talk to your agent. If you took a teeny bit less, does that make it perpetual so that that doesn't actually happen? Right?
Oh, that's a good point. Appreciate that.
My pleasure.
Well, again, Lynette, as always, thank you so much for all of your information and your knowledge and sharing that with myself and the viewers. That's it for today's episode of Gee Whiz Weekends. Please make sure, if you like this, to give us a thumbs up, subscribe, and share our channel. We want to make a positive difference and help as many people as we can. If you have any comments, please leave them below. And as always, check our email address at questions@LynetteZang.com, where again, I will be going through those and sharing those questions with Lynette in our podcast and on our show. So until next time, you guys, make sure to please stay safe out there.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.